Let's now practice Flexbox a little bit more by creating a small layout for each of our facts. So in our final app, what each fact looks like is this. Let's put it a bit bigger. So on the left, we have the text, then we have the category tag, and then here on the right, we have these voting buttons, basically. And you see here in this one that everything is nicely and vertically aligned. So that shouldn't be all too hard to implement using Flexbox, right? So let's come to our fact here. But before we start writing any CSS for Flexbox, we should always first see what exactly are our flex items going to be. So let's do that. So here inside this fact, we have a paragraph and we have this div. So right now we only have really these two flex items. However, as we saw here before, we really have these three things. Let me do it bigger again. So here we have these three things that are participating in the layout. We have the text, we have the tag, we have the buttons, right? So basically this means that we have three flex items, where here we can only really find two of them. We have the buttons, but then we have the paragraph, which includes both the text and the tag. So basically we want to separate them now. So I want to take the category out of the paragraph. Okay, because only by doing this, we can now treat it as a different flex child. So we can align it then in relation to the text and to the buttons, where before it was kind of hidden inside of the text. And so inside of this paragraph. And then Flexbox couldn't really access it inside of there. And of course, we now need to do the same thing here and make sure that you really select everything correctly here. Okay, but Prettier will help you with that. So if you selected it wrong and you then paste it, then if you save it, Prettier will not format it correctly. So it will not format anything. And maybe you will even get some error down here. So it might become red or something. And so then you can see that maybe something is wrong. Okay. So again, we are formatting our fact now, giving it a layout. And so that's what the flex container is going to be. So display flex, give it a save. And then let's come here. And already something happened, right? Let's make it even bigger. Well, that doesn't actually change much. Yeah, so let's just leave it like this. And now let's go to the alignment. So we want a vertical align, remember? And so for that, we use, again, align items and set it to center. And there we go. So we have that here. So we can see that here nicely that it is indeed vertically centered. So just like here. We don't have the buttons as nicely yet, but we will keep that for a little bit later. Next, let's add some space here between these elements. And for that, remember, we can use the gap property. So again, like I explained before, we could use margin also to create space. But when we're inside of Flexbox, then the gap property becomes more important for that. So let's do that here. So gap, again, will create some space between all the elements. So let's say 24 pixels. And so we have space here and here. Okay. So just watch what happens when we make this even bigger. So you see that these elements here are, of course, side by side and one after another. However, when we see what happens here, then these buttons, they always stay on the right side. So you see that? Here they are completely on the right side always, while here, right now, they are simply, well, one after another still, right? And so what we want is this here to be completely on the right. So the first thing that might come to mind is to do what we did here in the beginning. So that was, remember, justify content and then space between. So just like we did up here in the header. So let's give that a save. And indeed, now the buttons here are all the way to the right. However, this is not really the effect that we are looking for, because what space between does, remember, is to create the same space here and here. That, however, when we check out this, is not what we have. To make it clear, let's zoom out. Well, actually, that doesn't solve anything, but we can see it nicely here. So we can see that here, this society tag is still pretty close to the text itself, and then all the space is simply created here. So between this one and this one, right? And so in order to do that, there's a very nice trick that actually many people don't know about. And so, yeah, this will be a nice thing. So you will learn about something quite special in Flexbox. So instead of doing justify content, we will abandon that. And then what we will do is to actually add a margin here on these buttons. So let's first give them a class name. So here, class, let's say vote buttons, not buttons. Vote buttons. And I will just copy this here to the other fact. Okay. Now let's select that here. Vote buttons. And as I said, we will now set a margin to the left. So margin left. And now what value should we set here? So let's say we did 20 pixels, for example, and that would then create some space, I think. Let's see what happened. Yeah, so now this created some space. But how much space do we actually need so that this button goes all the way to the end? It would always be different, right? So we cannot really do it by eye. Let's just try that. So that wouldn't work. Let's say 180. That wouldn't work. 150. So this looks nice. But now what if we had another? So this you don't need to do. What I'm doing now, this is just to show you something. So now if we had some really small fact here, then of course that would again completely mess up what we did, because we want this all the way to the right side, no matter the other content. So we can use a special keyword called auto. And so then Flexbox will automatically calculate the margin that is necessary. So if we save it now, you see that it went basically all the way to the right. So it created a margin. Let me see that here. So on the vote buttons, it created the margin, which again is visible by the orange, which is exactly the amount of margin that is necessary for the buttons to be all the way to the right. So if you come down here and inspect this one, then you see that the orange bar is a lot longer. Okay. So of course we don't need this one here. This was just to show you. All right. So this is how we create this layout with Flexbox. I just remembered that I wanted to change something else here about the text, which was the letter spacing. So the Flexbox part is done. Let's just specify another property here about text, which is a new one. So we can basically specify the space between the individual letters of the text. So we can set some pixels here. For example, watch what happens when I say 3 pixels. So there's a lot of space now between each of the letters. And in fact, that happens on all the child elements here. So on this one and also on this one, there's also a lot more space now. So let's go back just to the HTML. So the class fact is actually on the li element, but we set the text properties on this one. So that's the font size, the line height, and also now the letter spacing. So we set it here on this element, but now because of inheritance, remember, all the child elements did actually inherit that or those properties. So both the P and the span element, they both now have the same letter spacing, right? So now anyway, what I wanted to do here is to set it to actually -1. So this is a new one. So there is also negative length in CSS, not just positive ones. And so this was yet another small thing that I wanted to show you. Okay, let's just put it back here just to see what happens. Yeah, so of course there's still some things that look not quite correct, but we will keep fixing that over the rest of the section. Now in the next lecture, we will take a look at yet another way of creating layouts in CSS, which is CSS Grid. So stay tuned for that.